Welcome to Window Dressing's Gothic Romance series. I'm Madeline Jane Auble. In this episode, I discuss Rebecca. The beloved book written by Daphne Du Maurier was adapted for the screen in 1940 by Alfred Hitchcock and features former Heathcliff actor, fresh from the moors of Wuthering Heights the year before, Laurence Olivier. He plays Maximillion De Winter, the widowed gentleman of the manor Manderley. His young, and I mean young, bride is the no-name narrator of our story, played by Joan Fontaine. The most brilliant of all the characters, except for Manderley itself, which takes on a Howard's End level lore throughout the story, is Rebecca. The remnants of her ghost are what keep the mystery of love alive in the brick-and-mortar altar that the living cohabitate in. The story opens with the lines spoken by the young narrator. Last night I dreamt of Manderley again. It seemed to me I stood by the iron gate leading to the drive, and for a while I could not enter, for the way had been barred to me. For a story published in 1938, this has an authentic Victorian ghost story tenor that matches anything the Bronte sisters could have written in the 1800s. The opening narration will later inspire the opening of the Gothic romance revival TV series of the 1970s, Dark Shadows. The show was a vampire soap opera that ran on daytime TV from 1967 through 1971, which began with these lines. My name is Victoria Winters. My journey is beginning. A journey that I hope will open the doors of life to me and link my past with my future. A journey that will bring me to a strange dark place, to the edge of the sea, high atop Widow's Hill, a house called Collinwood. At some point, I will cover the second major Gothic romance revival in popular culture, which occurred in the late 60s and early 1970s. But for now, let's return to the first revival in the 1930s and 1940s. Rebecca's lady's maid, Mrs. Danvers, played by Judith Anderson, acts on behalf of her mistress and Manderley. Danvers' strength of character and undying devotion set a precedent for love that none of the others can match. After the narrator and Mr. De Winter meet in Monte Carlo, where he is on a solo trip and she is there as a paid companion for a woman named Mrs. Van Hopper, they marry. A paid companion is basically a lady's maid for the middle classes. Mr. De Winter, Max, as I will come to call him, takes a liking to this 20 years his junior, moldable and delicate youth, whose primary character description is her cluelessness about clothes and life. In the book, a point is made about her frumpy and unflattering dress. The visual medium of film does not allow the young object of Max's affection to wear ill-fitting clothes. Her wardrobe in the film is actually quite lovely, well-tailored, and very much in line with the Hitchcock aesthetic. The only scathing insult I can give her appearance is plainness, and an awkward sensibility that doesn't allow her to take full advantage of her youth and beauty, as one should. I will chalk that up to excellent acting and direction. After all, a man loves nothing more than a woman who does not know her beauty, strength, and power. When the bride and groom return to Manderley, the real haunting begins. Rebecca had already become a specter of great love past for the narrator, but the fear blooms into a garishly large flower like those that surround the manor Manderley. The house, the grounds, and the servants all belong to Rebecca. Or so it feels, and a woman's feelings are usually the truth. Our narrator knew from the beginning, and later in her dreams, that this house did not belong to her. The haunting of a home by another woman, and deep-seated jealousy that is never fully acknowledged by the men in the room, is what makes Gothic romance great. These are women's issues, for the girls and the gays, so to speak. And the exploration of them gives a space to sit with the horror. This is the same reason women love true crime. Witnessing what is an omnipresent threat, but rarely dignified or acknowledged as a function of the very society that produces such a threat, is powerful. In this case, that threat is simply bearing the weight of the woman who came before, and being forced to unravel her story because the efforts made to erase it don't actually erase it for the woman who comes after. We call that ancestral trauma. Unfortunately, without a proper support system of women to help her assert her sense of self, the child bride takes the side of the murderous villain in this story. I said a little something about a well-mannered gentleman leaning towards monstrosity in the last episode, The Picture of Dorian Gray. That description also matches Mr. Maximillion De Winter in this one. Although his fits of mood exclude him from the emotionless part of that description, he still manages to murder his wife, the former wife, the powerful, beautiful one, not the new, naive, moldable child bride. I guess this is a good time to say, spoiler alert, Max murdered his former wife, Rebecca. That mystery is unraveled throughout the story, and by the time it is fully revealed, the narrator is so grateful that her jealousy of Rebecca was all for naught that she convinces herself that Rebecca was asking for it and that Max is the true victim. But let me back up a little bit to their courtship. While in Monte Carlo, when the child bride was just a child, not yet a bride, she would lunch and go on afternoon drives with Max. On one such excursion, driving down a dangerous cliffside coastline in a rented convertible in a scene that feels so much like the excursion from San Francisco to San Juan Bautista in Vertigo that it's difficult to separate them in my mind, if not for the fact that I know what the air feels and smells like in San Francisco and not in Monte Carlo. I know it's difficult to believe, but no one has ever taken me for a coastline cliff drive in Monte Carlo, even under the threat of murder. Our narrator is dressed in a plain, possibly even tomboyish frock, a white short-sleeved button-up shirt, and a plain tweedy skirt. She looks lovely, because she is, but her yearning for sophistication, which is evident not just in the quote I am about to talk about, but also in her choice of companion, makes her misunderstand the power of youth. She thinks the things she does not possess are what make a man like Max swoon. The things that would make her an equal, namely sophistication and age. But what this grown man of around 40 actually wants is a child he can dominate. She says to him out of a finally expressed doubt as to their equality, "I wish I were a woman of 36, dressed in black satin with a string of pearls." He literally laughs at her before saying, "If you were, you wouldn't be here with me." This all comes after he reprimands her for biting her nails like a fucking schoolmarm. Also, I would like to point out that while I was busy describing her not frumpy but somewhat plain outfit, I forgot to mention his polka dot bow tie. In noir, a close relative of Gothic romance, black and white checkers, Venetian blind shadows, and so on are indications of a checkered character, motive, or past. The polka dots on his bow tie are an indication that Max is somewhat spotted in terms of his integrity. This is one of the major filmic effects on the story, the wardrobe, which is not described in the detail that is given to the gardens at Manderley or the roiling emotions of the players in the book. Costume is the visual equivalent of the character-defining internal monologue on film. There was translation work to be done for Irene, the costume designer, the effect of which deeply affects my reading of the film. I have to be honest. Rebecca the film never really captured my imagination the way the book did. The book is beautifully written, raw, vulnerable, with vivid descriptions, so that the unraveling of the murder plot doubles as a coming-of-age story for a young girl who's truly on her own in life. It's difficult not to relate to her and care for her. In the film, the most the narrator gets out of me is casual empathy. Her love of the house and property of Manderley itself does not read on film. The high holy home has a reverse Howard's End effect in this story. Rather than the home becoming the younger woman's by way of the older woman's will, it is quite the opposite. Rebecca does not want the narrator near her home, let alone inside it. So even through marriage, it cannot pass into her hands. The house itself seems to trump all other concerns in the book. But in the film, the focus falls flat by focusing on the scale of the narrator versus the home. The looming ceiling height and intricacy of the decor are not enough to sell the narrator as righteous, and bypassing the importance of Manderley itself flattens the story. All of this to say that the depth and vulnerability of the narrator's character does not easily transfer to a visual medium because there are too many concerns one does not face on the screen. For example, you can't make this movie star look as unattractive and frumpy as the narrator feels and describes herself to be in the book. She ends up simply looking plain, as I have stated before. There are no tailoring issues that would really indicate a lack of awareness of her body or looks in the way it is written. She almost looks chic in her plainness. It feels modern, sporty, as was the trend in American women's wear at the time. The 1930s is when athleisure became a thing in the United States, and the narrator's aesthetic closely rivals what was actually cutting edge and chic. She simply doesn't look childish, so she comes across as impish and annoying instead. She does a great job with her manner in the film, but it comes off as gratingly obnoxious because she doesn't fit the character she is playing visually. There's also a heavy feeling of disgust and humiliation for me at her being made to live and eat the way her former, and I guess current, love rival did. I have a difficult time inhabiting the film's space because of that. It's devastating to watch. And without the intricacies of the mystery-solving inner monologue, it comes across as a humiliation ritual, one in which the main perpetrator literally wears a polka dot bow tie like a twisted clown. Whereas Rebecca, the dead woman who never graces the screen, the hated, the despised, and blamed femme fatale of our story, is the only one worth watching. That is in large part because of her wardrobe, which we see courtesy of another quite remarkable woman, Mrs. Danvers. Danvers was Rebecca's personal maid since childhood, and it does feel like there may have been something more than maternal love going on between the two women. However, that is nearly impossible to glean because of the way close female relationships seem wicked to us as a result of internalized sexism, and also the way lesbianism can still be casually described as wicked by a true blue feminist like me. Mrs. Danvers is cold but graceful in her statuesque form. She takes care of Manderley as if it were a child, Rebecca's child. When she first meets the new Mrs. De Winter, the disgust on her face is apparent. The disgust grows the more the young narrator people-pleases without any deference to herself or her own opinion. It becomes clear that the girl doesn't know herself at all, and even worse, she is kind in order to win approval, making her existence at Manderley feel thin and false. The house isn't just important. It's a proxy for Rebecca, and its firm rootedness makes the young narrator look like a wisp of a girl compared to the great halls of its interior. Even the flowers seem monstrous to her. I would argue that being a woman and not a little girl is the root of what scares her. Her real inadequacy, which to be fair is mainly a side effect of youth and society, comes out when she travels to the west wing of the house. A side effect of youth and the expectations of being a young woman is that you are malleable for men. That gets knocked out of you around the age of 36. About the same time you start wearing black satin and pearls and stop letting men in bow ties nitpick and demean you. Around this age, men start looking for a younger, dumber version to manipulate. And there is the circle of life as a female, or more accurately, the cycle of abuse that feeds young, unprotected women to men and kills the older ones off. In the West Wing, Mrs. Danvers finds the young narrator snooping, pretending to close a window that she herself had just opened. Danvers calls her on the lie and then proceeds to show her all of Rebecca's things, starting in the wardrobe. The first thing she pulls out is a luscious fur coat, with a myriad of gowns, all lavish, lush, and ladylike, glowing behind it. She then shows her Rebecca's underwear. This intimate and private glimpse into the ritualistic offerings of a lady's panties feels like getting a peek behind the screen of femininity, like the secret things that young girls are so excited to know about, but also scared of. The main offering is laid out on Rebecca's bed, inside a lingerie bag embroidered with a slanted-legged R. It is a black, fine mesh silk negligee with white wings for sleeves. Danvers delicately picks up the garment and shows her how sheer it is. The act in and of itself feels illicit, and more than a little pointed, like a dagger at the young Mrs. De Winter. Danvers continues to avenge her mistress through manipulations that seem fairly plain, but that the narrator falls for. The fact that she has no support from her husband and does not feel she has enough authority to replace Mrs. Danvers reveals the extent to which Maxim is willing to abandon his new wife in an effort to cover up his crime. He can't very well fire his ex-wife's lady's maid and the keeper of Manderley. That would look suspicious, if to nobody but Mrs. Danvers herself, and it is better to appease her than protect his new wife. But of course, she doesn't even tell Maxim because her naivety doesn't prevent her from seeing the truth. Her endless accommodations for his flawed character and moral failings are all part of the job description as his wife. The next opportune torture Danvers inflicts on the narrator is intended to drive a wedge between the already flawed affection of a husband and wife team that is built on her mutability. The couple decides to throw the traditionally fancy dress ball at Manderley. This event was Rebecca's bread and butter, her time to shine in her position as mistress of Manderley. The decision to throw this ball again was a pained and a forced choice in the book, one that was coerced out of the couple by obnoxious neighbors and the community's expectations. In the movie, it happens rather quickly and painlessly, at least in terms of the decision to have it in the first place. The narrator wants her chosen costume to be a reflection of her care and respect for Max and Manderley. Mrs. Danvers advises her to copy one of the dresses worn by an ancestor in the Hall of Portraits, a dress that Rebecca had worn to the last ball she threw before her death. Of course, the narrator does not know that, but she should know better than to trust Mrs. Danvers. Her desperation bypasses her good sense. When Max sees her in the dress, he yells at her, demands she go upstairs and change, humiliating her in front of his sister and her husband. To be honest, the dress does look completely ridiculous on her. The dress is wearing her, as they say. But worse than the humiliation is the knowledge that she failed at her first attempt to be the lady of the manor, and in so doing, proved she is not as good as Rebecca. Today, we would refer to this predicament as the result of her husband using triangulation as a tactic for control. Max let the ghost of his ex-wife haunt his new one rather than dealing with the consequences of his crime. Mrs. Danvers' misplaced revenge is a direct product of Max's destructive and evasive acts. It is to be expected that she would mishandle and misplace blame, because women are the only ones who are held accountable at any level of society then or now, making the new wife the only possible recipient of Danvers' rage. This event becomes the breaking point of Max's murderous lies. Unfortunately, when the truth comes out, the narrator chooses to bury it, and Manderley along with it. Or rather, she is coerced to do so by everything around her, especially the man she loves, upon whom her entire happiness and future rely. Ironically, when she breaks down, crying after the humiliation rites have concluded, she looks more whole, more herself. Something about the truth can light up a girl's eyes, even if aided by the tears in them. Mrs. Danvers takes the opportunity to berate the poor young girl with words about Rebecca's greatness. But none hit as hard as this line. No one ever got the better of her. Never, never. She was beaten in the end, but it wasn't a man and it wasn't a woman. It was the sea. The idea that a woman as strong as Rebecca could only be taken out by the power of an emotional and physical force as strong as the sea comforts me, even if it was just another case of a homicidal husband shooting his ex-wife down in cold blood that took the wild and willful beauty down. If Heathcliff were here, Wuthering Heights reference, he would have appreciated Rebecca. The truth is, Rebecca isn't gone. She is in the very foundation of Manderley, and the blatant disrespect and disregard for her life and death will not stand as long as that house does. Mrs. Danvers takes revenge a step further by encouraging the narrator to kill herself in a rather dramatic fashion by throwing herself into the sea from Rebecca's bedroom window in the West Wing. These kinds of cruel and difficult-to-prove manipulations usually come from the opposite sex, but Mrs. Danvers' justifiable rage and grief have turned into cruelty, and the intended victim is this lost little lamb who could use a rude awakening more than a permanent sleep. At the very moment she is about to jump, a distress signal goes up over the water. A boat has hit the rocks in the fog, and she is brought back into her right mind. The accident sends divers into the water to inspect the hull of the ship. They discover something else, a sunken sailboat with a body in the cabin. The boat is Rebecca's, and so is the body. Max's sordid tale of his wife's accidental death a year before had included a positive ID on a body that washed up nearby. That body was a plant, and her boat was sunk purposefully after he shot her in the seaside cottage where she frequently spent her time that she did not want to be with her husband, who turns out to also be her murderer. Can you really blame her for carrying on extramarital affairs when she married a man like that? A man who had to marry a child after murdering his first wife? A man whose ego was hurt by a woman who was smarter, more handsome, and more charming than he was? This discovery reopens the inquiry into the cause of Rebecca's death. Max tells his new wife the truth. The awakening she needed has come. But armed with the truth, she makes a choice to sell out her sex and herself to a man who values her only for her compliance. It's difficult to argue against her logic for that choice, considering that her learned value is in her acquiescence to him. So of course she would continue to do that as a means of safety. And I can understand why it would be so easy for her to turn her back on herself in this moment, considering no woman has really shown up for her in any way that wasn't wicked. But understanding that those women were motivated by consequences of men's bad behavior might have helped her see that there is no future in protecting what makes her valuable to her murdering husband, who literally does not want her to see outside of his needs because her wholeness will threaten his power. It's a tale as old as time, and as enduring as anything I can think of. If we had seen Max being driven mad the way John Ferguson was in Vertigo, his character would have more depth instead of being a thin caricature of Bluebeard. But the narrator doesn't see him as he is. She sees him as she wants him to be. Her perspective is so certain that it isn't even necessary to give her a name. But just because the gaze is fixed doesn't mean the motives are. She doesn't know what motivates her because he has dimmed the lights so low she can barely see what is in front of her. He admits that his reasoning for killing Rebecca was his ego. He agreed to let her live her life in exchange for all the benefits of having a wife who knows how to run a household and perform her duty in public. But his pride would not allow her to be with another man on the property of Manderley. So when he suspected she was with another man, her first cousin as it so happens, at the seaside cottage, he confronted and then killed her. The distinction between pride and actual care is in his lack of love for Rebecca. He does not feel humiliated because she hurt him. He feels humiliated that her pleasure might interfere with his image, an image that he cannot maintain without her, just like Manderley itself. The narrator quickly decides Rebecca was asking for it and jumps at the chance to align herself with femicide to feel loved. During Max's speech, he wears a fancy overcoat that appears to be made of cashmere. The collar is popped, and peeking out underneath the coat is an all-white bow tie. It seems the act of admitting to murdering his wife has cleansed his soul of its spotted past and made a man, albeit a dandified one, out of him. You should hear the tone of his voice when he says to his wife, "You despise me, don't you, as I despise myself. You can't understand what my feelings were, can you?" Honestly, that "can you" is so fucking pathetic. I could sympathize with vengeance, insanity, love, lots of scandalous motivations for murder, but cowardice is not a worthy cause, and the murder of a gem of a woman like Rebecca is more than a mark on his character, it's a stain on his soul. Rebecca had been diagnosed with cancer, but told Max she was pregnant. That is what sent him over the murderous edge. You might think a child would engender decency, but you must have never told a man like Max you are pregnant if you made that assumption. His new wife says, "Rebecca's dead. That's what we've got to remember. She can't speak. She can't bear witness. She can't harm you anymore." To that, I say, I bear witness on Rebecca's behalf. Max is cleared of the crime after a hiccup where Rebecca's cousin gets a hunch that Max murdered her and attempts to prove it, or rather, he tries to blackmail Max, who then calls his bluff. All of this goes nowhere, and Max is cleared of suspicion, seemingly getting away with murder and making out with a child bride who will hang on his every word. But then, the fiery flames of Rebecca's redemption come to claim Manderley. The manor and the grounds catch fire. Was it Mrs. Danvers or Rebecca's ghost acting through her that lit the match? There is a moment when the local magistrate questions Danvers about Rebecca's movements the day of her death. Fauvel, that is the first cousin who was having an affair with her, asks Danvers, Danny as he calls her, to confirm his relationship with Rebecca, claiming they loved each other. This line doesn't make it in the movie, but it's really worth noting. Mrs. Danvers says of Rebecca, "She was not in love with you, or with Mr. De Winter. She was not in love with anyone. She despised all men. She was above all that." This moment unites Mrs. Danvers, Rebecca, and Manderley in my eyes. So the question of who is ultimately behind the fire is both asked and answered. Danny burns inside Rebecca's West Wing room like a witch burned at the stake. The villains and heroes were reversed in those tales, too. I think after a year of a quiet, watery grave, Rebecca deserves some fuss and fire. Thank you for listening to Window Dressing's Gothic Romance series. I will be back soon with a bonus episode, and then I plan to finish the series with the reboot of Wuthering Heights. Until then, please like and subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening, and follow me on Instagram at Window Dressing Podcasts for more content. I'm Madeline Jane Auble.